Hey everyone, and welcome to a quick Forge tutorial on how to make natural terrain. So I've seen a lot of comments in Forge videos and stuff like that, of people saying that, I don't know how to make terrain, can someone please post a tutorial? So I'm going to just go over how I personally build terrain. So first off, this is how I see a lot of people making terrain. And, it's very basic, it isn't necessarily the greatest, it doesn't look as natural, and a lot of people, when they make terrain that looks kind of like this, then they're kind of a bit puzzled on how to make their terrain look a little bit more natural. So if you come over here, this is the way that I build my terrain. As you can see, it looks a little bit more natural, looks a lot more jagged and rigid, and obviously it takes a lot more blocks. I'm a very detail-oriented person when it comes to Forge. Everything to me is in the fine details. So let me go about the process of how I made this rock. One of the biggest mistakes that I think people are making right now, and maybe this is the way you forge, this is just a personal mistake for me, but if you're having trouble, then I'd recommend try to do it my way, is people start with this flat, large piece of terrain. And to me, this is just kind of the wrong way to go about things. So I wouldn't use those. What I would start with is cliff larges. I know that seems a little bit odd. Even if you're not building cliffs, I'd recommend starting with cliff larges. So you can just kind of place things haphazardly. You'll notice that I do that a lot is when it comes to terrain, I'm very haphazard in my placement. I'm not very precise or coordinated, just because that's not the way that nature is. When you go out to a forest, it's not all perfect and placed and everything like that. It's thousands upon thousands of years of different factors affecting what the terrain looks like. So it's important to note that if you try to place everything nice and perfectly, it's not going to look natural. So after you have your cliff pieces, line the C stack here. After you have your cliff pieces placed down, that's when I would add the big, massive slab of terrain, because then you can really make it gel nicely in. As you can see, this looks a lot more natural than just starting with the start with the big piece of flat terrain. You can kind of get these little rocky outcrops, and it looks quite nice, at least in my opinion. And that's another thing about Forge, is that it's very opinionated. You might think that my terrain looks terrible, and that's not necessarily a bad opinion. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just going through my opinion on how I make terrain. So once you want to start making cliffs, then I see a lot of people that just put down, a cliff piece. And it looks nice, but it's a little bit basic. So what I recommend doing is just double layering. To me, this is one of my first steps into making natural looking cliff faces and walls and stuff like that. It's just simply add a double layer, a piece of cliff. This is kind of how things look in nature, but I don't visit cliffs every day, so maybe it doesn't look quite right. But this is just the way I think it looks more natural. Now the next thing you want to do is add a bunch of rocks, and it's really important that you choose the right type of rock. There's a lot of different rocks, and they don't all look that nice, and then most of the rock pieces do not gel well with the cliff faces. So I recommend using exclusively, and I only use exclusively, rock C-stacks smalls, and maybe the occasional rock archways. Now those ones are a little bit more awkward to use. So what you want to use these rock C-stacks for is just to break up the texture. That's something that's very important when it comes to just aesthetics in Forge. Is just to break up the texture. You have to remember that aesthetics in Forge isn't just something you can add into the end of your map. Aesthetics is about your block placement, your block usage. Aesthetics touch every last part of your Forge map, at least in my opinion. You guys may disagree, and that's alright, but the way I see it is that when I forge, I don't start building aesthetics at the end. I make sure that all of my blocks look aesthetically pleasing, and I delete a lot of maps because I get bad gameplay, I get bad performance issues. It's my philosophy that a good map is a map that does both aesthetics and gameplay well. So if it's not doing one of those well, then I usually just delete the map altogether, because I feel there's enough gameplay-oriented maps that are really fun to play on, and there's enough maps that are out there that are really aesthetically pleasing. But if you just make one or the other, it's not really offering anything new. And making a map that's both aesthetically pleasing and is good for gameplay, I think, is where the true great maps come out of Forge. Not that I should say that you should just delete all of your first maps. Your first maps are very important. I remember when I first started forging, my maps were terrible, but they're very good stepping stones. Do not discredit your first forges, because you're going to learn a lot from your first forges. I've been forging since the days of Halo 3, so I'm a very long time forger. I love Forge. Anyways, getting back to the tutorial. So after you have all these kind of rocks placed, I'd recommend if you can spare the cliff pieces. I'm very liberal in my use of pieces because I'm very detail oriented. So I would recommend I'm not going to say triple layer, but I would recommend using these as rock pieces almost, because they look really natural and they just jive really nicely with your cliff face. So you can just kind of like put these everything around. Once again, very haphazard in their placement. It doesn't have to be all perfect and pristine because that's just not the way nature is. So once you have that, you might want to spruce this up and make it a little bit more natural. I guess it's kind of the point of making natural. I just realized that looked kind of funny. So yeah, you might want to add some shrubs and stuff like that. And for those, I would recommend using these Tree 01 larges, or I guess just the first 3 trees. They look really good as just kind of bushes. And once again, placing these very haphazardly, not really spending too much time to get their exact placement perfect, because that's just the way nature is, not perfect at all. So once you place a couple of these, you got your bushes. I recommend putting these on ledges in particular, because I think that bushes naturally just kind of grow on ledges a lot easier than they just grew on this side of cliff faces. So once you have those in, you're doing pretty good. But you might want to add some other trees. Now, one thing I see a lot of people doing is they just kind of get the same tree and they put it down. I wouldn't recommend going down that pathway. The way I usually do things is I kind of curve and tilt all of my trees, because trees don't just stick up straight naturally. They kind of bend and they curve, and they do different things. Not every single tree is just uniform. I like these palm trees personally. I think they just look fantastic. These are probably my favorite trees in the game. The dead trees also look really nice if you've got a good map for it. I know my map Crevice looked really nice with the dead trees. I had a lot of people commenting on how they like the dead trees on the map. But try to use different types of trees too. Obviously, you don't want to break from your standard palette, so don't put like coniferous trees and palm trees all together in the same location. You're going to want to stick to a bit of a level of consistency when it comes to your trees. Another thing that's important is that you don't want to just completely space out your trees like crazy, like I just did there. I would recommend kind of like grouping a couple trees here and there, just to make it look a little bit more natural. A couple little extra trees, and this tree looks a little odd. You don't want to bend it too much, otherwise it just looks a little bit weird. But yeah, just make sure that you're varying up your trees and that they're not just cookie cutter copies of each other. I think that's the most important part of making good looking trees, at least for me personally. So the last step you're going to want to do is just surrounding rocks. And once again, going back to C-stacks. C-stacks are probably my favorite rocks because they look really natural. They look really nice within natural terrain. So I just recommend combining a whole bunch of rock C-stacks together. They're a very versatile piece, as you'll notice. You can do a lot with them. And you can use them for detailing your terrain. You can use them for little outcrops. You can use them to attach to your cliff bases. They're just a very good piece. Do not underestimate the potential of the rock C-stack. Probably my favorite rock in the game. Just very, very nice rock for just the versatility of it. So you want to make sure you're making this look as natural as possible. The most difficult thing about rocks is that when you're placing them, they don't really tend to look like they belong, because it's just like you feel like you're just kind of putting them there for cover. But this is really easy to do. I find that you just got to really detail your terrain quite a bit by using these C-stacks and such to your advantage. I also wouldn't just kind of like throw them randomly around. Like, I wouldn't just put them around. You want to make sure that you're combining these pieces together to make something that looks a little bit more natural, a little bit more sleek and nice. So like I said, just combining a whole bunch of these together to make something that just looks a little bit more natural and a little bit more interesting. And I like to experiment when I'm in Forge, so this is kind of an idea that I'm just kind of experimenting, putting these rocks on here, but I think it's looking pretty nice. But overall, that's just how I do terrain personally. I think it looks a little bit better than just basic rock placements and such. But anyways, this has been a short Forge tutorial on, well, not very short, but this has been a fairly long Forge tutorial on how to build natural looking terrain. I hope this helps you guys on your Forge maps, and I will see you guys in further features of Forge maps and in future Forge tutorials. Have a good one.